Because sadly in my life I've been stabbed twice. So, like, which is the
Not once,
saddest
but
thing.
twice.
Don't ever get stabbed twice in your life. But
Don't get stabbed
terrible thing.
once.
Don't ever get stabbed.
Yeah, just
The funniest thing is, I think I'm one of the few people I know that actually can actively say as I have a sword wound, and it's not actually because it's a cool thing, because I was at my friend's house and he bought a sword. He was 16 and we're both idiots, and he started swinging it around and he dropped it on my foot. and, and two 16-year-old teenagers should not swing around especially because he spent all day sharpening it. So like,
yeah.
I think I had the best reaction because he dropped it on my foot, and I was like, I think my foot is bleeding because he just saw like this big gush. Like it wasn't like it gushed out, and because blood doesn't gush out like that. I don't like it, but it was just like big dark blood just started welling out of the top of my foot. But yeah, that was pretty. It was pretty funny. In retrospect, I guess if you think about it, yeah, but yeah. But I can say that I have a sword wound.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and I am really excited to announce today's guest. He is a United States Army veteran, has had multiple management roles involving Splice, which is owned by Overactive Media. Currently, he is the general manager of the Toronto Defiant. Please let me welcome Jaesun, maybe better known as just Jay. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
It is good to have you here. I wanted to start off the show because you are one of the few military members that I've actually had on the show, and I wanted to start by thanking you for your service to our country because I think it's really important, and I really appreciate that you enlisted were involved with the military for so long.
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess it's an amount of years.
It was a long. It was 8 years. It's a long time. I mean,
yeah, about eight and a half months.
Yeah.
Almost.
I mean, if you think about it in esports years, that is like almost like half or a third of a player that you have for the amount of years.
I guess in esports years, it's pretty long. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is pretty long. I'm interested to kind of get to know who you are, because there's a lot of cool facts about you out there, and kind of understanding who you are as a person and like your philosophies in life and all of that. I know you're feeling a little sick, so thank you so much for being on the show for that. One of the things I learned about you is you actually used to be involved in fighting games. And like you were very good at fighting games, from what I heard. You played with Jaesun for a brief bit. Was fighting games like the first serious esport that you got to see?
I would say I played with Jaesun. I'm good friends with Jaesun. Mm-hmm. We don't play the same fighting games. He plays more. I played Tekken. It's a little different. But it's when I was younger, like maybe 17 or time, 17, 18, and that's when I was in fighting games, and we all came from the same arcade in New York. It was Chinatown Fair. They call it CF. It's still there. It's not the same arcade, different owner, so different management and all that stuff, but it basically was like the fighting game arcade of New York City at the for a long time, and we all came from there, like Justin, me, like Eddie Lee, Taro Sanchez, Sanford Kelly. So like,
oh, hello there.
Gamers.
You kind of cut out there. You might want to put your mic just a little bit closer.
Oh, sorry. So like all old school New York City fighting gamers, like they all went to CF.
Yeah.
And I was friends with Justin since he started playing competitively, but we didn't play the same games, obviously. But we've been friends for a long time. I competed in Tekken when I was like late teens. I was in a sleeve org. I say it was called Empire Arcadia. It was like a New York-based org.
Yeah.
And the same org as Justin. I wouldn't say it was like the best org experience, but anyway, let's see.
I mean, your teens would have been in the 2000s then, right? That have been like
about
somewhere
20
in the
years ago. 20 years ago.
It's yeah, like
quite a lot, quite a while ago compared. You know,
I think we're actually pretty close to the same age. I think you're a few years older than me because I'm 27. I look 12. It's an unfortunate side effect of my stature, but I think you're a few years older than me. But
I am turning 40 this year.
wait, really?
Yes, I am quite a bit older than you.
Okay, you are way older than me.
Yeah.
That's not bad. You aged well.
We are not the. We are definitely not the same age.
You were
near the same age.
See, I thought you were in like your early 30s.
No, I'm in my late 30s. I turn 40 in October.
Well,
So,
congratulations for maintaining such a good look there.
Yeah, I'm still technically a 70s baby. I'm like at this cusp, 79. So you know.
Okay,
But,
so
yeah.
what was early? You said you grew up in Chinatown, and
I did not grow up in Chinatown. I grew up in New York.
Okay,
But I played fighting games in Chinatown. So I would travel from. I grew up in Queens.
Yeah.
Flushing, Queens. I was born in Seoul though. My family immigrated to the United States when I was very young. My grandparents moved first, and then I moved with my dad, and then so like 1983 around that time.
Okay. So you must have been pretty young then when you came to the States, and like right around 4 or 5.
Yeah, I was 4 years old. About 4.
Okay. Do you remember that experience, like moving over to the States at all, or were you still too young to really remember it?
I do remember a little bit, like, because I didn't speak. I didn't speak English, obviously, when I was 5 years old. And then my grandmother, she gave me like the hardest book to like try to read. So I didn't speak English, and she said we went to this. You know how like there's newspaper little kiosks in airports, and she picked a book at random. And she told me, "Hey, you just learn how to read this book." I was like, "This is the worst way to teach a child how to learn English." But not now that obviously in retrospect, I was 4 years old. I'm not gonna say anything. But so I didn't know how to read it. I just fiddled with the pages. But I did learn how to read it eventually. I don't remember what age I finished it by, but I still had. I think my grandparents still have the book, but it was The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien.
I was going to ask you if it was a Tolkien book. I was thinking Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. I was 4 years old, and she gave a little Korean boy that spoke zero English The Hobbit. I was like, all right. Now thinking back, that it's kind of a ridiculous situation, but you know.
Yeah, I think I read The Hobbit when I was. I must have been middle school when I read The Hobbit. It was the only Tolkien book I could actually read because I tried to read The Lord of the Rings and I could just never get into them. Which is funny because we've actually talked about. I don't know if you remember us talking about this, but we briefly talked about like the Dragonlance series.
Because we did chat about it, because you liked it, but because of your I think your gamer name, your tag.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because my gamer tag for a long time was just Raceland. My work doesn't really love, like, it's weird using my gamer tag for work, just because the nature of my work, and it just tends to be using my name more often. So I kind of walked away from it. But like fantasy novels are something that you really enjoy. What kind of gave you a love for fantasy novels? Was it that first book, The Hobbit, that you were given?
Probably because my grandmother gave me that first book, and then I learned how to speak English in school. I remember finishing that and The Lord of the Rings by 2nd grade. So like 1st or 2nd grade. Because my grandmother, like, she told me to finish these books. And so in Flushing, there used to be a Barnes and Nobles right on Main Street. And she would buy me a book or two a week. And so I would just go and she would buy me a book, and I would just pick out a book, and usually it would just be like, generally, being like in second and third grade, I would read like Chronicles of Narnia, a little bit of stuff. Like it was,
Okay.
liked it.
Yeah. Did you ever get to play Dungeons and Dragons then? Because I know that a lot of people who read like fantasy books like that also played Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons is a huge pastime of mine. But there was also a lot of stigma. So
I never actually got to. I did play on the the computer versions of it, like the Baldur's Gates and stuff like that. But I never actually got to play the actual sit down, and all that version of it. I know many people have. I know I have friends that have and everything, but I just never got around to do it. I've always done the electronic, digital versions of it.
So you said you moved from Korea. I'm assuming that your family is Korean then?
Yes.
Okay. When you first moved over, was there any like difference in like cultures that you had to like fight against all the time? Because I've had other people who are like either Chinese or Korean, and they've talked about being like first or second generation when they first move over, that there's almost like the competing cultures that they have to like deal with. There's their home culture, and then there's like the outside world culture where everyone else is in. Did you have to deal with some of that?
Probably like a lot in because where I grew up in like, so my family wasn't poor in Korea. They actually but then when they came to America, my grandparents, I guess, were pretty, and my dad were pretty naive, and they trusted the wrong people, and they got pretty much like fleeced out of all their money for a long time. So we ended up living near, like, I guess, pretty much near the projects, I guess, in Flushing. So it was for the longest time, like, your home life, and then, but I mean, I think school probably pretty much is a good place to learn about everything else, And my grandparents, I guess, were pretty for being Korean grandparents, I would say they were pretty progressive, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of looking at that, what was school like for you then, going into the United States? Like, what was school like for you? I've had lots of different people on who said that it's been like good or bad. Were you someone who enjoyed school, didn't enjoy school?
Like early school or like
yeah, let's start off early, and we'll move our way through it, because I know that you also do have some degrees that I want to talk about too, which I find fascinating.
I guess like early school was a little different because, so I guess growing up in an Asian household, they're very like strict about you going to school and everything. So I would go to school, and then I would come back home, and usually 3 days a week I would go to like test prep often, and so that was actually very stressful, because in New York City there's what's that called, secondary schools, like for junior high school, and they require a test admission for junior high school, and there's also high schools that require test admission to get into, and generally because my grandparents really wanted me to get into the better ones. They wanted me, they sent me to the test prep, and so my grandparents worked very hard to pay for the all the extra tutoring, which was just miserable for me, because it's just like, you already go to school all the time, and you have to go 3 to 4 days a week extra to go to school, and I would say that you didn't really have a life, but obviously, you didn't get to really enjoy your childhood as much because you go to school so much. But I guess, that whole like Asian child tiger mom style, I guess, going on. Yeah, you kind of resent it, but.
Yeah, I remember resenting school. When I was in high school, actually, I switched from like a lower income school to a much better school. And they were so different in like their curriculums that I remember having to get a tutor like 3 to 4 hours every day just to try to catch up. It was so awful. And it was like literally you just do nothing but school, and that's the only thing that you worry about. And not particularly fun. So did your family live with your grandparents then? So was it like your grandparents and your parents all underneath one household, or was it different households?
No, so I lived with just my grandparents because it was just my dad. My dad lived by himself because
Okay.
so it was just me and my grandparents, and my dad would live with his. He would usually live by himself, or sometimes with girlfriends and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And then I didn't know who my mother was,
Oh,
so my mother left my dad when I was a baby, so she didn't move over with us to the United States.
okay.
So, and I think my grandparents and my dad purposely chose not to ever tell me who she was because of it. So,
Yeah.
um, I think they thought it would upset me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like my grandmother was basically my mother growing up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh, but so my dad, he 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 basically lived away, and he was in the same city, but he worked all the time. So I just lived with my grandparents, and then we lived in an apartment. My dad lived maybe like I saw my dad maybe once a month
Hmm.
at a time. So generally, I didn't really have a great relationship with my dad growing up either.
Yeah.
Um, Eventually, he did remarry, and I have a half brother and half sister.
Hmm.
Um, I do know from email like correspondences that I think my mother's side that I think she passed away, but I
Hmm.
don't really. I've never really followed up on it. And I do know like I have a older sister from her
Hmm.
that they sort of like don't that broke from my family because of it and all that
Hmm.
stuff. But like generally, like my relationship with my dad is I'm older now, so it's
Yeah.
like it's water under the bridge. We're both old men. Generally, he's like in his 60s. I'm almost 40. We don't care anymore, so
Yeah.
it's fine. Like we see each other fine. But there was like a good chunk of our lives where we barely saw each other. Like I don't talk to him ever. Like, but
Yeah.
eventually, um, but, but let's see. So for the most part, my grandparents raised me.
Hmm. So, you being younger and living with your grandparents, what was that like? What are your grandparents like, or what were they like?
Um, I mean, they worked very hard. I mean, but
Mhm.
if you think about it, they raised someone. They raised the son, and then they're raising a second son, basically.
Yeah.
So they were a lot older, being parents twice.
Yeah.
They raised my dad when when younger, and now they're in their 60s trying to raise me again. And I was a pain in the ass. So, and they're
Why
trying to
was
raise
that?
because I was a smart ass. So I was and I got in trouble all the time. Especially growing up in I guess like 80s New York City. I would get in trouble all the time. I came home once like bleeding out of my forehead because I got into a fight and someone hit me in the forehead with a with a rock. Uh, I came home once because I what's that called? Was it they had to find out that I got stabbed in the leg once. Like
You got stabbed.
so it was like that was when I was a teenager. Like so it was kind of like compared to them raising my dad in relatively a quiet, childhood to my childhood, and they're much older now, so it's a lot more
Yeah.
stressful for them. Um, so and my grandfather, obviously, he was working 7 days, 6 to 7 days a week,
Oh.
uh, in his 60s, um, because he had lost all his money that he
Yeah.
had brought over from Korea. So you know, which sucked obviously, but he to cope with, I guess, the stress and just I think he felt a lot of guilt from losing all that money too. He drank a lot at night.
Yeah.
But even though he drank a lot, he would get angry and belligerent and everything. He never got physically violent or anything,
Yeah.
but he would just he would rant. I would say he would rant a lot, but
they sound like really special people to you though. Still, like they sound like people who still had an impact. I can't believe they dealt with you with that, like getting stabbed.
Yeah, they dealt with a lot of crap. Yeah, okay. I would say.
Okay, so I take it was like the violence and the getting in trouble. Was that your school, or was that more on you? Was it like the area that you were in, the school you were going to, and it was just very common, or was it more just the person you were?
I would say it was like a combination of. I was like both kind of. There were times where when I was very young, up to a certain point, I think in middle school, where I was very bookish and forced to go to school all the time. And then when I was given a little bit of freedom and I was allowed to not be so much, and I was given some time on my own, I did go out and make friends I probably would not have had before and get in a lot more trouble. So, I would say that that classic childhood rebellion, because you're forced to do certain things all the time, and then you automatically have a little bit of freedom. You take it all the way, but not all the way, but see how much you can get to before
But was stabbing the last straw where they were like, okay, listen, this is it. We're really
no, because sadly in my life I've been stabbed twice. So, which is
not
the saddest
once, but
thing.
twice.
Don't ever get stabbed twice in your life. But
don't get stabbed once.
Don't ever get stabbed. The funniest thing is, I think I'm one of the few people I know that actually can actively say as I have a sword wound, and it's not actually because it's a cool thing, because I was at my friend's house and he bought a sword. He was 16 and we're both idiots, and he started swinging it around and he dropped it on my foot. and two 16-year-old teenagers should not swing around, especially because he spent all day sharpening it. So like,
yeah,
I think I had the best reaction because he dropped it on my foot, and I was like, I think my foot is bleeding, because it just saw like this big gush, like it wasn't like it gushed out, and because blood doesn't gush out, like I don't like it, but it was just like big dark blood just started welling out of the top of my foot. But yeah, it was pretty funny. In retrospect, I guess, if you think about it. Yeah, but I can say that I have a sword wound. So.
Yeah. I'm missing that gushing blood. I stuck my hand in a snowblower when I was 15. It was one of the stupidest things I've ever done. But I can actually say that when you cut off an appendage, at least
that's different.
It definitely tends to gush a little bit. So, oh my God, stabbed twice. What happened the first time you were stabbed?
That was because I was being mugged and I didn't want to give up anything. And then they stabbed me, but then they didn't take anything because I think they didn't intend to stab me.
Yeah.
So I think when I don't know. I think when people threaten you with a knife, they don't always intend to actually move forward with the threat. But then they did move forward with the threat, but then they realized what they did, and then they ran away after they did it. So.
Where did you get stabbed at? Was it anywhere like really dangerous? Okay.
In the leg.
Okay. So as long as it doesn't hit any arteries, you're pretty good.
Even in the leg, if you hit arteries.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Is like it sounds like you avoided the arteries. So.
It wasn't.
which
It
is
wasn't like. It wasn't like a big. It was like you remember those old like the Swiss Army knives?
yeah, like the red
Yeah.
ones. Yeah,
Yeah, the red ones, like
yeah,
pocket knives. Yeah.
yeah. I used to have those because I went backpacking all the time. Those are very sharp, by the way. I've cut myself on those.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting. So in school, then you mentioned that you were very studious for a while until you started like this rebellion phase. Did that like follow through with your studies too, where you just stopped caring as much for like the school system?
Definitely, I did. You know, like I would. There was a point where like I got really like I thought school was pretty easy. Like I still passed all my classes and everything,
Yeah.
but like I was not as studious. Definitely, like um, I went to school in Manhattan though. Like so, I would have to travel every day. It was like maybe like an hour, 45 minutes to 1 hour commute from Queens to Manhattan. I went to like and then commute back, so it's like a 2 hour round trip. Just taking the subways. And then by like my senior year, I got really lazy about school, I would say. But
Okay. Okay. So you played. You mentioned that your late teens you were playing fighting games, right? And you were doing that. And you were with an org. You said that wasn't a great time, at least for the org standpoint. Why was that?
I would say in general, orgs back then were not the established orgs they are now. But even now, right? Like there's still
we
a
still
lot
hear
of orgs.
we still hear about like Denial and a couple other ones that I've.
Imagine 20 years ago when, you know, there's less repercussions, right? There's no such things as agents or esports lawyers or any of that stuff. There's no leagues. There's no, there's not even really the fear of the jury of the internet, really, to hold you back, So a lot of times esports orgs at the time, if like, they didn't even call themselves esports orgs, obviously. There was no such thing as they were, especially in fighting games. Fighting games tends to not try to like contradict themselves with esports in general. That's actually kind of an interesting topic too, because fighting gamers, I guess, they want more money in their prize pools. At the same time, they want to stay very grassroots.
Yeah.
But it's hard to stay grassroots and not take in,
Yeah. Fighting games are like one of the coolest things for me because it does seem so very much grassroots and like I would like if I had to use a word to describe it, I would say almost raw. Like I think that's like what I think of when I think of like fighting is like, oh, this is very like raw. That is like a good way to describe what tends to be seen from it.
So. And they're in this weird space where they should be getting more money in prize pools. There should be like an evolution of kind of a pun, Evo. But like there should be where more money in their prize pools. There should be more sponsorships and all that stuff. There should be publishers putting back more into the game. But at the same time, if they do that, the players have to understand if that does happen, that it does change the landscape of fighting games. It does become a lot more commercialized, and I guess the whole sellout factor does come in. They have to get used to all the commercialization of fighting games. They can't just stay fully grassroots as much as they want to anymore. I never really understood. You can't have your cake and eat it. You just, it's one or the other at that point. If you want more money put into fighting games, you have to give up. I guess give up some of it.
Or trade. I like the word trade because you have. It's not like you're giving up your soul.
Parts. Yeah, you're trading parts of it. I guess you're trading parts of your grassroots.
Yeah.
Just to get some back.
Do you think that that's where it's going to be headed? Do you think it's just a matter of time until it gets there? Because I feel like eventually it most likely will, just because people are going to want more money. Because as they get older, they want to be able to support families and hypothetically speaking, and their lifestyle. And I think that maybe that like there's some top fighting game people who I think are pretty well off because they're also like influencers and they're content creators. But for everyone else, they're gonna want something else.
I mean, generally the best the top fighting gamers tend to have to be like good influencers, either that or good brand ambassadors.
Yeah,
I would say if you're gonna get signed to be a good fighting gamer. I mean, in Splice we did have a fighting games division.
Yeah.
And I would say that anybody that looks to be signed in general as a fighting gamer, and you can't just rely on how good you are at the game. You have to be a total package, I guess. You know, you have to be good on how to producing content and all that stuff generally. Because it's very different than like League of Legends, Overwatch, or any of the other franchises.
Yeah. I feel like even with like franchise, like I feel like some players they don't want that aspect of marketing. They don't want to deal with that aspect. And I think it's super important. Like overall,
oh, it is. It is
so important that I wish more people would like realize that if you want a long-standing career, this is something you should learn to find some love in it in some capacity. Because I think it'll be easier. They
don't. A lot of players, I think, kind of realize it, but then a lot of players don't. How much it increases their portfolio and value as a player, and it can sometimes double their value if they're just, they're good at marketing themselves.
Yeah. And I don't like the idea of being a like this. I feel like
it's not just about being a sellout.
Yeah,
you don't have to be a sellout. Just you just have to be more accessible.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to kind of look at it, is just starting to be more accessible. So I had a question for you. When you were going through high school and kind of getting towards the end of high school, were you thinking about like college? Because I do see that you have a degree, but you also went to military. What was happening towards the end of high school? What were you looking at doing with your life?
So at the end of high school, it was interesting because my grandparents were struggling. So I actually dropped out of high school at the time.
Oh, really?
So to help them so I worked for a long time. So I worked from when I was 17 and a half till I was in my late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So I just worked. And even though I didn't live with my parents, I just worked and I would occasionally help them.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally help them, and because I could not afford to really go to college at the time, or any of the colleges I really wanted to go. I guess I could have gone to, like, say, community college. Community college would have been fine for me too. But I was just very unhappy in life, I guess, just because I had been going to school constantly all my life, and then I didn't want to just keep going to college. I guess it was just like keep going nonstop, and then I just wanted a break, and so my break was to work. So at the time I was 17, I started working, and then around when I was maybe a couple months after that, I moved out. I lived with a roommate for a while, and since then I never moved back with my family. But every now and then I've lived alone or with roommates. But I've had various jobs from when I was 17 up until I was like late 20s, and it's when I was near 30 that I joined the military. So. Yeah.
So I have to ask you a question. Like, the sense of family, you have it sounds like a really strong bond with family and the idea of helping family. Is that something that you were kind of taught? Because I know that my family is not very connected at all, and I know a lot of families in the United States are not that well connected. Where someone's like, you know what, I need to drop out of high school to help my family. Like, where did you learn that sense of passion for family?
I would say it's weird. Like, I'll help them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they ask me to help them, I will help them. But I'm also very disconnected Like, so it's weird. Like, I will help them out of a sense of duty, but I am not the most like super like close in terms of, I guess.
Okay.
So like, I don't call. Like, I will go like 10 years without calling my family ever. Like, but if they ask me for help, I'll help them. You know, like if they ask me to like fly tomorrow to give them aid on something, yeah, I'll go. But I won't call them. Like, I won't wish them a happy birthday. Like,
Very
it's just one of
interesting.
those things. Yeah.
Huh.
Like, if I sit in a room with them, I won't really have anything to talk to them about, really.
Yeah.
So, like, it's more like I do love them, you know, and I do feel like um, I should take. There's like with my grandparents, I do love them. I do feel uh, like a sense of duty towards them. You know, they did take care of me and everything, and I do take care of them. Um, I think sometimes with my grandparents, um, it's a little bit of. I'll go a bit more into that later with my grandparents, probably because um, it has a lot to do with uh, my son, my
Yeah.
ex-wife, probably because they want to see my son and my ex-wife, and also
Mhm.
because she my grandmother and I were very close, but now because of her age, uh, she's in her late 90s now.
Oh wow.
She doesn't recognize me anymore.
Oh, I'm
Like, she
sorry.
doesn't recognize anybody. She only recognizes my grandfather.
Does she have
So
Alzheimer's or dementia?
yeah, she has dementia now.
I'm sorry.
So and then my grandfather is fading also. So they have like very like a long, yeah, they have a lot of trouble like actually remembering anybody. So like I think it's a lot of like I think I feel a little guilty because it was a long, especially when I was in the military. There's a lot of times where I did not keep in touch with them, and then by the time I did come back to New York to see them, like she was nearing the time when she was very much fading fast. I didn't really get to say goodbye to her, I guess.
Hmm.
And then now, like if I do call her, there's no point. She's not gonna get on the phone. You know, there's no.
Yeah. So it's almost like too little, too late kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of something like that. And then like my grandfather, like he wants to see his great grandson a
Yeah.
lot, but he who lives with his mother, uh, and my grandfather understands that me and my ex-wife are not together anymore.
Yeah.
But you know, sometimes you know he forgets where I am and then where all this stuff, and it's difficult sometimes, like trying to explain it again.
Yeah.
And human beings are selfish people sometimes, especially when we're wrapped up in all the things where we have to do with our daily lives, and sometimes we do forget uh, to to take care of our family members sometimes.
Yeah. And appreciate the small things. I feel like people probably miss that a lot too in just daily
Yeah,
lives. We kind of forget to take into like what can we be grateful for, and what can we appreciate in the kind of like now. Um, so with your dad, you mentioned you didn't get to see him that often. I take it you kind of the same relationship. You're not that really that close.
no, we're not very close. Like he would come once a month,
Hmm.
like so I'd see him every now and then.
Yeah.
That's about it, pretty much. Eventually, he did remarry,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty. I would say I'm closer with my. I'm pretty. I have a pretty decent relationship with my half siblings.
Yeah.
I do care about them. My my baby sister. She does get mad that I never call. Like, and she does want to see her nephew.
Yeah.
And I did promise her when I'm on vacation from the Overwatch League during the off season that I will visit and all that stuff. Just obviously when I'm here in California, she lives in New York and all that stuff. It's a lot harder.
Yeah,
But,
it's a pretty long distance away.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of understandable. I wanted to ask you, and if this is too personal, I totally understand. Did you ever think about reaching out to figure out like who your mom was or anything about your mom's side of the family?
I think I thought about it at some.
Yeah.
I think maybe I remember when I was maybe like in first grade. This maybe this I remember this woman visiting visiting us,
Yeah.
and she took me out, and I spent the day with her in New York. And I remember that we got caught in the rain because got caught in the rain, and then we got back to the apartment late, and I just remember I was very wet and everything, and I remember my dad and my grandparents were very mad at her for bringing me back home late,
Yeah.
and they had a big fight, and they argued, and then I never saw the lady again. So maybe that was my mom. I have no idea, but
Huh.
don't I remember. But
Yeah. Fair. So you ended up working from 17 until you said your late 20s, where you were just kind of working. What kind of jobs did you work? Anything and everything, or?
I had a lot. I was a tax preparer for an accountant. Yeah, I did prepare taxes for a while. It was interesting too because it was in Manhattan, and the accountant, he had a lot of he had a celebrity once too. You know Liev Schreiber? He's an actor.
I don't know offhand, but I'm also terrible with names, so that could be why.
Movie was he in? Let's see. He was in recently. He wasn't Into the Spider-Verse.
Huh. Fairly famous actor then, because that's a great movie.
See what movie he's been where he's actually get to see him. Let's see. Korean candidate. Some of all. Well, he's decently, I guess.
Yeah. Famous?
Well, he's on that TV show Ray Donovan. He's the main character.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Oh, okay, but yeah,
But
he was
no.
Yeah, but I was like 18 years old, and Liev Schreiber, I remember, was one of the clients. And I don't remember if I ever prepared his taxes, but yeah.
Oh, I do know who this is.
Yeah, this is like 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And Liev Schreiber, this is, I guess, was still in New York City or something, or before he moved to Hollywood fully, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I may have done his taxes. Or I helped prepare his tax. I didn't do his tax. I helped prepare his actual tax form. Like,
yeah,
for the accountant.
Interesting.
But, I worked. I did that. I worked at a packing, like a shipping company.
Yeah.
Like for packing and shipping, and from that packing and shipping company, I ended up working for a porn company. This is the oddest transition because the packing and shipping company used to ship for a porn company, and they needed people to work for them to do their shipping directly. So I ended up working for them directly in New York.
When you say that, it sounds like the start of a porno. Like a shipping guy comes to a house, and you're just well.
So I worked in completely the non-sexual side of it, the warehouse distribution end of porn. So, oddly enough, yes.
But that's one of the coolest jobs I think I've ever heard someone say so far about talking about.
I went from working at packing and shipping in New York to working. Yes, Dave was my boss. And Greg used to be one of our customers, and he owned a porn company, like, and he needed someone who worked in the warehouse distribution, and he was like, he offered me a job. It's more money. I was like, sure, why not? Like, and I ended up working for Greg for like 2 years. Okay job.
Huh.
Except for the returns department, because that's gross.
I imagine. Oh God, that is hilarious. That is amazing. So at what age do you start to say, okay, I want to join the military, and what made you want to join the military?
Let's see. I think it was that I worked at Dave and Buster's for a long time. I was the senior game technician at Dave and Buster's for a couple of years. And that's when I met my ex-wife.
Yeah.
That's where I met my ex-wife. One of my technicians was ex-military. He was ex-army. His girlfriend was an army recruiter. And I remember at the time that I was 29. I was 29 years old. I was turning 30. And I was engaged.
Yeah.
Or I was about to get engaged. And so I had two career paths in front of me. I could have been like a game manager at Buster's, which I was thinking, it's okay. All right. Or I could go join the military, I guess. I could give it a shot. I was like, but at the same time, like I was like, yeah, so I gave the military a shot. And it was interesting because everyone I knew said all my friends said I was too old to join the military because I was almost 30 years old, I guess.
Yeah.
I was I was nearly 30 year old, but I said, hey, man, why I could give it, how bad could it be? I guess in terms of like at least trying, in terms of like the whole basic training process. Like if I don't pass that, I don't pass that right now.
Yeah.
They'll kick me out. They'll kick me back from that part of it, or at least the physical fitness portion of it. But I ended up a lot better than expected, so I kept going. Actually, I ended up doing pretty well. Actually, it was actually pretty funny because I think the military was the first time I gained a lot of focus, I guess, in the military. There's a lot of pros and cons.
Yeah.
There definitely is. I will say though that it did give me a lot of good life experiences.
Yeah.
And it did help me discover a lot of things about myself as an individual. And it did help me to push myself before. Before then, I would say I was very not lazy. I worked very hard in all my jobs, but I didn't really think I had an end goal. Like, I would just work. I would just work in terms of like, but I didn't really see like, other than working and just, I guess, going day by day, week by week. I didn't really see like a future career path for myself. At least in the military, like I felt like, I could try to come up with something in terms of like, sketch out an entire career path for myself.
Yeah.
But I did push myself a lot harder because in the military. So I went to basic training and to AIT, and I ended up graduating, I guess technically the top of my class because I was they call it the soldier leader of the cycle. And then I went to AIT, and then me and my wife at the time, we went to my first military for about various duty stations around the world, but while in the
Oh, you're cutting out again.
oh, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. There you go.
yeah. So
Yeah. So, had you had you have one child then?
I do.
Okay. So
when-
had you had how do I phrase this? Had your son been born yet when you joined the military?
No. He was born while I was.
Okay. Okay. So you ended up joining in the military. A lot of my family's military, so I wasn't able to join the military because of my missing fingers. They actually told me that, oh, guess what, you can't join, which was, at the time when I was younger, was very sad. I'm kind of more okay with it now. But one of the things that I did notice is you had a degree in psychology. Did you get that while you were in the military then?
I finished my degree in psychology in the military because so you could go to school while you were in the military.
Yeah. What made you choose psychology?
Originally, it was supposed to be computer science.
Yeah.
And then I switched over to psychology. I think because it was good with like dealing with soldiers, like like other soldiers, and just dealing with people in general. So that's probably why I ended up taking it.
Okay.
And
yeah, I have a degree in psychology, so I understand. It's good. One of the things that I did notice is that you are either currently still working or you have achieved your master's degree in digital forensic and cybersecurity. Is that something you're still working on?
Oh no, I finished it. I just haven't like updated it. Yeah.
Okay. But, that's a very interesting master's degree. What made you choose digital forensic and cybersecurity?
Probably because in my job in the military, was communications. So it was basically originally. So when you're a commo in the military, I was a 25 uniform, a signal support communications. So originally I had to deal a lot with antennas. So I was a retransmissions team chief for a long time in Korea. But eventually my job involved, by the time I got out, I dealt mostly with computers and networks and network security. And it just sort of was like a topic I did enjoy. And while I was in the military, I ended up getting certificates. I got like my Security Plus and my Network Plus while I was in the military. Like they paid for me to get my certificates. And so when I was getting out of the Army, I ended up going to John Jay School of Criminal Justice in New York City. And that's where I did my master's degree.
Okay, that's really cool. So you ended up doing a long stint in the military, and you said that your son was born while you were in the military.
Yeah.
Were you able to still be around him? Like, were they able to follow you? Because I know a lot of military families travel a lot, and sometimes they get stationed away. And I know that you were in Korea, New York, and Hawaii for a lot of your stationings. Were they able to come with you?
So yeah, I mean, they did move around to a lot of my duty stations. That was good. Like, obviously they don't move around to when you do other things, but they stay with you on this. They stay on the base and everything. In your duty station. But he was born in upstate New York. So when I was stationed at Fort Drum.
Yeah. Okay. So what made you want to say, okay, I want to get out of the military? Like, what was that? What was the point coming to where you were like, okay, the military isn't the career path for me?
I was in my last duty.
Yeah.
It was near my. So I could have re-enlisted, but I chose not to re-enlist because it had a lot to do with the fact that I was getting me and my wife, we got a divorce while I was in Hawaii.
Okay.
A lot of it had to do with the circumstances around my divorce and my son, and so I think at the time I blamed my divorce on the military. And it was an unfair assessment, I would say, because so when I worked in the military, when I was in the military, I tended to work maybe too hard. I would leave. I would work from like I would go, wake up at 4:30 in the morning, go to PT, and then start, and then I wouldn't come home till like 7, 8 at night, and it was unnecessary. Like a lot of people. I think I buried myself in work a lot, and in general, like especially this is before my son was. I ended up being a very neglectful husband, like in terms of like I would just work all the time, and I would never be home, and I pushed my wife away, so and because of it, it fractured our relationship because I was, I was very working. I worked all the time. I was sort of very distant, pretty cold in general. And so by the time we tried to repair our relationship, it was sort of irreparable. So and then other things had occurred at that time, like so we got to a point where we stayed together because our son was born, and that is never a good reason to stay together, I think. And so we tried to force the relationship for our son, and then we just ended up fighting all the time. And so like that was always, it was a pretty bad, a lot of bad situations, because we just argue all the time, and then I think both of us were very unhappy because of it. And then so we just got it's very distant. So like when we got divorced and then she left with my son, I think I was very angry at the military because I felt that they had, because of the military, like just the life in general, that I had lost my son, and it wasn't really them. It was more like how like I had chosen not to have a good work-life balance, but it's more like it's easier to blame an institution than to appropriately, shoulder the blame on myself. Obviously, healthy speaking, to be healthy speaking, it's not 100% technically, I guess, in a relationship. Technically, it's like maybe I'm not fully to blame for a relationship falling apart, but like at the same time, I do have to shoulder a good deal of responsibility if I'm, being a negligent husband and not being home all the time and not being very loving, and it's very difficult, obviously, for anyone to deal with.
Yeah. I think it's important to accept our responsibilities, so that way we can actually fix it. Because if you can never accept the things that you did wrong, you can never fix it for the future. So I think that's kind of like one of the things that you need to. I commend you for being able to do that, because I've worked with a lot of people in different relationships who are unable to accept their own responsibility for that kind of stuff. So looking at the military, you end up saying, I'm gonna leave the military. You get hired to Splice very soon afterward. That is an interesting transition, right? Because I got your last year being 2016 in the military. You were hired 2016 with Splice, which. How does that transition come about? Because that is an interesting jump.
Oh, so when you're transitioning out of the military, they call it ETS. Mm-hmm. So you get like a time in the military to ETS, during this time, you take classes. Like you take classes on how to do your resume. You take classes on job hunting, and
Yeah.
all these little things, and you get a lot of like free time, technically.
Yeah.
And I would say during this time, like I had a friend that worked at Blizzard, and they said if I wanted to get into the closed beta of Overwatch, and I was like, yeah, sure. I was like, why not? I have more time on my hands, and so I started playing the closed beta of Overwatch, and the closed beta of Overwatch was much smaller
Yeah.
space. There's less people that played, and it was interesting in the closed beta of Overwatch. Like I would play ranked, and just like everyone that plays Overwatch for the first time, I played DPS, but it was a terrible experience because nobody would ever play support. So I started playing. I said screw it. I started playing support, but then you know, I'd be go on Twitch and I'd watch Twitch streams, right?
Mhm.
And there's only one person ever really streaming support uh, regularly at the time, and it was Pure.
Yeah.
Um, and me and Pure, like we would chat like on his stream. He was actually very like interactive with his stream, and we actually like became like him and I like became friends through his stream, and then we became friends in game. And then at some point, he asked me, I guess it was like the weirdest transition where I could manage his team because I may have been the most adult person they knew, but
That's very, very real
like,
possibility.
I mean, they had a coach, Brian Blackstar. They had a Victor who was sort of like their, like kind of like semi de facto kind of like half manager, but Victor was also like a student. He was worked all the time also, but so I said, yeah, sure, I'll see what sure, why not? They had a team deck, figured it out, spoke to some orgs, ended up meeting with Splice, and then Splice and the team hit it off. They were called Fight Out Go McCree at the time. It was like Pure, Clockwork, Flame, Papa Smurf, Steel, and then like it was they ended up getting signed by Splice, and at the time, and when they signed the team, they signed me as the manager. So we all joined at the same time.
Okay.
So what was interesting is that while we were on Splice, the team went through different iterations of the roster. Pure stayed on for the entire time of Splice Overwatch. I would say that outside of him, most of the roster switched out.
Yeah.
There's like a position where we had a lot of Europeans, like Twitty and Graceful came in. But then there was portions where that near the end where it was like like a good chunk of Kungarna came into the Splice Overwatch roster. Yeah. But when this is during I guess the dark times of Overwatch, like right before the Overwatch League.
Yeah.
But there was very little going on in terms of competitive Overwatch. There was still stuff going on in Korea, but out in the NA and EU scene outside of the Gosu Gamer weeklies, there was almost nothing. So Splice decided to close their Overwatch division down, and I remember like after they let the players go, the management asked me to stay on, and at the time there was no regular position for me. But they were going to figure something out, and so I basically helped with all the other teams, more as the assistant, like an AGM position, and then we opened up the fighting games division, which is what I led. That was my division, and then which we did end up closing after a year because fighting games is it's not a profitable division.
No.
But I eventually moved I became the head of all the North American teams and also the head of partnerships and sponsor like the sponsorships.
Yeah.
So that's what I did for a long time.
Okay. So kind of looking at that, I actually like you mentioned that fighting games isn't profitable, and I don't know how much you can go into this, but what is profitable in esports? Because right now, like from the outside in, like that is like a question that like scares the living daylights out of me. Of like, what is actually profitable inside of esports? Because right now it seems like IP holders profitable. That is if you make a game and you get people to buy it, that seems profitable.
Well, fighting games is not profitable for many reasons. Number one, because there's no league to buy into, so there's no proper sponsorships around it. So fighting games all depend on the player.
Yeah,
that player has to be a very strong brand in himself.
Mm-hmm.
So what that player brings is that player has to be able to bring in you have to be able to use that player to bring in sponsors.
Yeah.
If you can't bring in sponsors with that players, like if you can't market that player, that's very hard, like to justify, because the way fighting games is that there's constant traveling. There's compared to other games, it's more physical LAN tournaments. And then there's like maybe 3 to 4 a month or more. So there's lots of flying, lots of hotel per player. So the cost is very high just to field one player in fighting games. Usually for fighting games, because the prizes are so low, you tend to not want any prize cut. So in most games, there is because the prize cuts prize pools are generally large. There is a nominal prize cut, right? But in fighting games, there's usually for a fighting gamer, there's 0% prize cut. So the org has no if there's no prize cut for a fighting gamer, at least there's no way to actually recoup any cost in terms of at least the flights or the hotels, right? So it all really depends on if that player is both marketable in some way. If he's not marketable in terms of like winning all the time, he has to be marketable in terms of being a great content creator or just a great personality. It's just, it's very difficult, in fighting games.
Do you think that that's better with franchises? Because obviously with Splice, you guys have the LEC, you have the Overwatch division. You're going to have a COD team, I believe, has been announced too. You're going to be working with that. Is the franchise more secure in the idea of like sponsorships and funding? Because I obviously don't know, and I don't know if anyone knows.
From a large or like sustained or point of view, the franchises are a lot more desirable. Mainly, obviously, there is the scary factor and the fact that it's expensive to get into franchising.
Yeah,
obviously, it's a huge gateway. Like, it's a massive barrier. It's a massive
insane
barrier.
Amount of money.
Yeah. To be fair, that money itself is sort of like what drives the franchises, but there's a lot of like benefits to being in a franchise. There's no fear of relegations. There's whatever sponsorships that sponsor the franchise. Sort of like helps the league and helps all the teams in general. Sort of even if they're not individual to the teams, there's sort of like a general sharing of revenue across the board. So I would say it's a lot more desirable, but at the same time, there is a massive a barrier to get into them. It's scary for a lot of obviously for any smaller, even decent sized orgs, it's difficult to get into. I was
just gonna say 100 Thieves just said that they weren't getting in.
It's difficult to get into. I would say we we have three friends. We're actually in all three. So we're
Yep.
in League of Legends, Overwatch League, and Call of Duty. So um, those are large barriers to get through. Once you're in. So
Yeah. So
but
I kind of wanted to ask you a question about like, because your title is general manager. I kind of wanted to ask you, what does that actually mean? Because I've heard different things from different teams on what a general manager actually does. What would you describe a general manager's like duties and like responsibilities in the scene?
so GMs on different teams all do different things.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah. So that's actually very specific to each team. So my duties on Defiant, I would say, are probably more pronounced than on many teams. So I am less of a team manager.
Mhm.
I don't do their house stuff.
Okay.
Like I am not their babysitter.
It's-
I refuse to I will
Yeah.
not clean up after them. Like
That's
on
understandable.
occasion, like if there is no one available, I will do these things. I will help them out. I'll escort
Yeah.
them to things. Especially if my someone else is not around and everything. That's you
Yeah.
have to be able to do that, all that stuff. But but every team is very different. So, but I deal a lot with the logistics of the
Okay.
team. So there's obviously overactive logistics, and
Mhm.
then I'll deal with the team side logistics in terms of coordinating it, um, and then I'll deal a lot with the budgets,
That makes sense.
the budgeting and how the admin.
Mhm.
So I'm the main admin for the team,
Okay.
as well as I tend to do everything to do with contracts, negotiations. I do everything with the league for the most part,
That makes it.
operations.
How much do you worry about like stuff related to marketing? Is that something that falls underneath your purview too? Is like worrying about like marketing and dealing with that stuff, or do you have someone else who does that?
No, that's an entire marketing department in our.
Okay.
So there is a marketing and communications that deals
Yeah.
with marketing and media and all that stuff.
Mhm.
I can when they have to do stuff, they let us know in terms of if there's a new sponsor coming in or there's stuff that the players need to do.
Yeah.
That comes down the pipeline. But I deal with strictly the team competitive side.
Mhm.
The makeup of the team, the makeup of
Yeah.
the roster, the hiring of the staff when it comes
Yeah.
to the coaching staff and the support staff for the team, whatnot, as well as releasing of staff and all what that stuff.
The inevitability of when that ends up happening in our industry.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, because we talked about this earlier, that marketing being so important. And you mentioned that you do contract negotiations and stuff like that. How much does someone's marketability factor into your talks with someone? Like when you're going to someone, because you mentioned that you focus on the competitive, and I imagine that probably takes the priority. But how far behind is their marketability? Because I mean, obviously, someone I believe it's Mangachu, who's Canadian, and has I would imagine a fairly sizable marketability in Canada. I imagine that's really important. How much does something like that factor into a signing?
I would say there's a decent factor nowadays because maybe season 1 of Overwatch it was less.
Yeah.
But I think now that season 2 is passed and then season 3 is coming in, the teams are a lot more focused based on marketability, especially because with home games coming in, you have to be able to appeal to your fan base. And your fan base is your fans in your home cities.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't market towards your fans at home, you're going to have some difficulty. So I would say that's actually pretty important nowadays compared to before.
Because you guys went from a full Korean roster to doing a mixed roster, which I think is I really like that idea personally. But then I see teams like London Spitfire, which is going to stay most likely all Korean. But it's very interesting because they're obviously London. And so I don't think any of their people are from London. So it makes an interesting dilemma of like that marketability and how important do they need to factor that in. Obviously, if they're winning, that will probably go a long way to their marketability because everyone likes to be the winning team. But the moment that they stop winning, then you end up losing that.
Yeah, I mean, every city loves a winner, right? Like,
yeah,
so
exactly.
They'll ignore a lot of things if they're winning. Right?
Yeah.
So, that's the big deal, right? Like, so if London, like maybe London fans may have grumbled at first, but as soon as they won the championship, they all those players became London.
Yeah, they're like, oh yeah. I see it with like Vancouver too, right? Like Vancouver comes in as long as they keep winning. I just worry when the teams stop winning because it's inevitable, right? Like a team cannot stay on top forever, in my opinion. So
I would say it's the model to mixed is generally healthier sustainability, and for your market. It's not easily sustainable in terms of team performance.
Yeah.
It's a mixed roster is the most difficult type of roster to sustain competitively. Just there's so many things behind it to make to make work. It's not just about language; it's about cultural barriers that you have to get through. Just there's a lot of mental issues that you have to get past, preconceived biases that players just automatically assume about each other. Like different groups of players just automatically think the other side is just worse, or just they just don't want to play with each other. That you just have to get through.
Yeah. I mean it's an easy thing to blame, and that's what human beings tend to do. Is if there's an easy thing for them to try to blame, they tend to go for that, and that is like one of the things that kind of comes up, and it's definitely an issue that I do not think having mixed rosters is the easiest way to go.
Think about it. If a mixed roster fails, one side is going to blame the other among the players. The players will never say it's their side's fault. Western players will say it's the other side's fault, and then Korean players will say it's the Western players' fault. They'll never ever, almost. I won't say, because if I say in absolute, you can never say absolute. Absolute is a terrible thing to say. Nothing is absolute, but you can. Good 80 to 90% of the time, players never take responsibility.
Yeah,
I've been in esports management for 5 years now. And I've rarely ever seen a player take responsibility for their own actions in that time. Generally, they have to get called out for it.
Yeah. 100%. Do you think that that's a cultural thing? Because obviously you have other things like esports likes to compare to sports a lot. I think honestly it has more to do with business than anything else, but it is a comparison that gets made a lot of the time. Do you think that there is some cultural differences that is the reason for this? Because if you look at like sports, you start at a very young age, you kind of build up to it, whereas esports is very much a singular if we're going to call it singular sport until like 17, 18, where you get kind of thrown into a team environment. Do you think that cultural aspect is why people aren't willing to accept responsibility? Probably.
I think because, like regular sports, you start off very young, right?
Yeah.
It's a team aspect. You get to be like, hey, even in schools, like, hey, you did something wrong. You should fess up. On the soccer field at school or whatnot, it's a team environment. You get to, if somebody messes up, you tend to you don't bring them down, but be like, you're supposed to be able to, live up to your mistakes and learn from it, right? While in esports, a lot of times it's sort of like you play by yourself, individual. Even if you play with your friends, it's a lot of times it's now that your Overwatch is not an individual.
Yeah.
Right? It's very much a team-based thing, but people I would say because there is no pipeline, there's no easy pipeline into esports. Esports, especially in the Overwatch League, right? Everyone's 18 and above, right? So there's no and the tier 2 scene is not fully developed very well.
No.
So it's not like there's high school and junior high school esports teams programs where there's like junior high school coaches, sitting there be like, hey, you messed up, like, you got to live up to it and do better from it. No, it's like all these kids are living toxic environments online, most of the time in solo queue, and then all of a sudden they have to try to be on a professional environment suddenly, and to start being like productive professional teammates. It's a big transition, right? So they have to go from being like one way not originally from. So think about it. So how does a player transition, right? You go from being a solo queue star, right?
Yep.
To maybe playing with some teams on amateur level.
Yep.
Right? That's your first transition.
Yep.
But if you in that solo queue, in that transition during that time, if you still never learn to become like a productive team player, right? But you just won based off pure mechanical skill just because your team was better,
Yeah.
Where is the actual like progression in terms of like there is no ecosystem where people are learning to be actually better teammates.
I 100% agree. Yeah. Because it's even using contenders. If you're just better skilled wise, a lot of times you can get picked up from that. Like people will scout you and people will try you out, and different teams have different values of like teamwork and what percentage they want to value that at. One of the things I wanted to ask you is something very unique, and I bring up the cultural aspect because you went through military. And military does a very good job of putting a bunch of different people through kind of like a system where they kind of force them all to, you are going to get along to some respectable fashion. Do we need something like that for esports? I don't want to say as extreme as boot camp, but boot camp is designed by nature to kind of start to bring people together for that. Do we need something more like that until the cultural aspect evolves?
I mean maybe, but it's hard. I would say it's hard, especially with
I think it's legally hard. I don't know if you can get away with what the military does.
Yeah, I don't think legally you can do something like that, but it's hard also because when you scout for players in esports, you tend to only look you only look at their mechanics, right? You don't see anything else, right? You don't see what type. You can scout a person and they could just be a terrible person. You can scout their VODs, and even if you scout their comms, but then when you're in a team environment with them, you're sharing a team house with them or practice facility with them. They never clean up after themselves. They shut down if the bad scrim happens. They blame others when scrims go bad. You may be a great player, but if you're a shitty teammate, then you don't belong on a team. You could be the best mechanical hit scan player in the world, but if you can't be a good teammate, then I don't think you are a good Overwatch League player.
Yeah. I would agree with that. One of the things we had kind of mentioned earlier is like a mixed roster being so hard to kind of deal with and work with. And I think that Toronto kind of struggled through out the season with roster like things coming up, either people retiring / being traded, or like same thing. It wasn't just your roster though; it was also your coaching staff. You lost a coach stage 2, then obviously Bishop closer to the end of stage 4. Was this just a learning period for you guys where you were trying to figure things out as you were going on, or did things happen?
A lot of shitty things happened to us, I would say. We kind of got shit on the entire year. So 2 weeks before the start of a stage, Stellar wanted to retire, which kind of was not great for us. Number one, to replace Stellar 2 weeks, so we have to replace our brig player 2 weeks before. And how do you do that easily? You really can't.
You can't.
You can't replace your brig player immediately.
You're restricted for anyone only in NA because of the I mean, visas in itself. I don't even know if you could get a visa before the end of stage 4 for someone else outside of the NA.
So, and this was beginning of stage 2. So we had to look for somebody immediately, and the only person we could find that looked promising at the time that we could get in a quick amount of time was IM37, really.
Yeah.
Relatively in a quick amount of time. We did get him in a quick amount of time. Like we signed him and he was in the arena in like 3 days, pretty much. Like, it kind of sucked for our first game because during the time we signed him and he had to travel, he did not scrim with us that entire week. Like, so he basically played his first game without any scrims. Like, it's kind of like, so when people see results, the context of results kind of suck because be like, well, all right, so that team just lost. Well, that team just lost with a player that did not scrim with them. That's kind of a caveat when you say that. Like,
that's
so you really just played a 6v5 that entire game.
Yeah.
By the way, with a bot.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just telling you. You know, it kind of sucks. It's kind of shitty for the other team. I know it's not shitty for the other team because they won.
They're like, oh yeah, this is great. We dumpstered them.
Yeah, but like, it sucked for us in terms of like, because we basically had to give away a game that we didn't have to give away. But I don't blame Stellar. He was unhappy. He missed his girlfriend. He wanted to go home, and he wanted to go home. He wanted to retire. Later on, he broke up with his girlfriend. Him and his girlfriend broke up, so he wanted to come back. And by this time, we're like, well, we don't need a break. So like, we don't really need to fill your role right now. Yeah. Like, because he wanted his role back on the team. And so we basically said, not really, like, but at the same time, Boston was also interested in him. You know, so we worked that out with them. You know, so so he could still get back in the league. You know?
I mean, I was looking through like player signings and stuff like that, and the coaches league, and I was like, oh my god, Toronto just got screwed over by a lot of. It looks like from the outside, like my perspective, it's oh my god, there was just so many bad things that must have happened that for their entire season that was just unfortunate.
Well, Don never left. We let go of Don like mutually. It was mutual left.
Mutual.
Don was like Don for the longest time stopped. When he was after Valiant, you remember he was in season 1.
Yeah.
But then he left Valiant. When he was in Korea, he stopped coaching Overwatch. He coached PUBG. Huh. So when we asked him to coach us again, he was coaching Overwatch again, but it wasn't really his game anymore.
Okay.
So he really was sort of. It wasn't his style of coaching anymore. Like, he didn't really know Overwatch as much anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Don was more of a I guess closer to a performance style coach. He was good at like less with strategy. He was good with player morale.
Yeah.
Player interactions. Like
makes sense.
He was good with like getting players to interact with him, getting players to open up to him. But in the strategy side, because he had been away from the game for over a year, he was very much behind the other coaches. And that was nothing against him. It was just because he had been coaching a PUBG team.
Yeah.
First. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. So can you go into the Bishop release? Because it was very random from the outside. If you can't, I understand. Or if you don't want to.
Oh, the Bishop release? Oh, like well, I mean, what do you mean random? Like how it just happened?
So that's not even that it's happened. It's that he didn't even finish out the season. There was not that many games left in the season. That was the thing. It's like, it was like, it's at the end of the season. You guys knew you weren't getting into playoffs, I believe, at the time. You couldn't make Gauntlet at the time. And then it was like, okay, see ya. Was that just like, I'm testing out other coaches, see what you wanted to keep for next year?
It's more like there was a reason why Bishop got released. It had nothing to do with other coaches. Okay. And that's all we can really go into.
That's fair.
Like, yeah.
100% understandable. So, what are you guys looking to do for next year? Like, I think that's what everyone probably wants to know. What's going to be different about next year? Hopefully, you won't have bad things like players retiring, because that would, with a meta like that could just screw you over so hard. What are you guys looking at changing for next year?
Well, the biggest thing right now I'm deep in the hunt for a head coach.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the biggest thing is I'm doing head coach interviews right now. So that's obviously a big deal because we're looking for a leader for the team.
Yeah.
And that's going to help drive what the character of the team is going to look like for 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that we're definitely more driven so going into season 2,
yeah,
a lot of things were kind of unfortunate for us in terms of we were a bit rushed on certain things, and then a lot of players we originally wanted we couldn't get. A lot of players we tried to get were sort of like taken out from under us, and then we just ended up getting outbid on a lot of players. It just happens, especially during and for this coming season, because we do have a lot more time in advance now, we're going to be a lot more aggressive for certain things. So we just
I like that. I like that style. One of the things I wanted to ask you, I'm getting close to like the end of my question, but there's one last question I want to ask you, and it got brought up kind of earlier where you were putting too much time to work. One of the things that terrifies me for next year, and we talked about fighting game traveling, is the fact that next year Overwatch League is going to be doing many more homestands, which includes more travel for players. They're going to be doing less games, but it is a lot of travel. Are you worried about burnout for next year for players or teams? Is that something that it concerns you or not really? Because it concerns me, it terrifies me.
I would say burnout is a very huge. Clearly, I would say our burnout was a little different than other teams, mainly because Stellar's burnout, a lot of it was based off him missing his family, and he was a little stressed out by some of his teammates. I would say Asher was burnt out before he joined our team. But he still didn't know that yet.
Yeah.
Like that he was not interested in Overwatch anymore, but he didn't have that realization until like deep into the season that this is just not for me anymore. Mm-hmm. And like I want to move on from Overwatch. Yeah. Like, and he discovered that while he was with our team. Like he's, I don't know if you noticed. Like he was with our team in the last game and everything. Like, it's more like he was much happier after he left Overwatch. Just doing his own thing. He's getting into music and everything. And
yeah, he has a great singing voice, by the way. Yeah. Like, because he was on Gladiator, so he is so good at singing. So I think that is a much better thing for him for the future.
Yeah. I think he lost his passion for Overwatch after season 1, but at that time he didn't know what to do with his life. So he's just like, let me just keep doing Overwatch for a little bit till I figure it out. But then once he was still on an Overwatch team, he was just like, realized this is just not for me. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think he was burnt out by us. Yeah. I think he was just sort of came to the realization that Overwatch just isn't for me. But I will say for my staff, they did get very much burnt out. I definitely feel heavy burnout myself. I tend to work. I work generally like 7 days a week, so it's pretty rough. I have taken up a hobby, so that keeps me it's relaxing. Good. So
Okay. What about for next year though? With the travel, is the travel something you're worried about with burnout and stuff like that, or is it not really that big of a deal?
So we are planning on like getting a coach for the team that's going to travel with the team at all times. So our League of Legends has a performance coach.
Yeah.
That stays with him. He's a former UFC fighter.
Yeah. Gunny, right?
No. Gunny's our head of performance division.
Oh, that's right.
I'm talking about our UFC.
I can't remember his name.
I forgot his name, but he stays. You see him in the videos, the vlogs for the Splice Legal LEC team,
Yeah.
but he lives in Berlin, obviously, and he stays with the team at all times. But we're gonna do something the same with the Overwatch League team, and I think also with COD at the same time. So all three franchises are gonna have a performance coach. So
that's awesome. That's great to hear.
That's the main plan around it, especially with the traveling.
Awesome. That's something I'm really happy to hear that from the outside, because it's something that's really important to me. So believe it or not, that's actually all my questions that I had for you. So that I kind of came through. I hope you enjoyed your time. I hope you're feeling a little bit better. If you have any shout outs that you would like to give, I normally don't give them, but if you want them, you're more than welcome to have them. I do have one last question after that, but if you want any shout outs or anything, you're more than welcome to have them.
Oh, like shout outs to like people?
Yeah. I don't know, people, friends, family, loved ones. You don't have to. Okay, good. If you don't want to, my last question for you then is, having had the experience being on the show, it's very unique. There's only 2 criteria you need to meet. They need to speak English, because I don't speak other languages, because I'm a little bit uncultured in that. And they need to be involved in esports in some aspect. It does not have to be coaches or players. Who would you have come on the show if you could see anyone on?
If I could see anyone on this show?
Yep. They have to speak English.
That speak English.
That speak English.
Probably, I think, would be a good person to have on this show. There's actually a bunch I think would actually make a good.
If you want to give me 3, I'll take 3.
Let's see. I'm just gonna put them in there. Put them on the spot. Probably the GM of a friend of.
Sorry. Say that again. You cut out.
The GM of Valiant. He's Mike.
Yeah.
Friend of mine. Maybe. Did you ever have Seagull on this show?
I have not had Seagull on the show.
I don't know if he'd be willing to do it, but Seagull would be probably interesting. And then you should. Have you had players on the show? Probably,
yep, I have. Yep.
Probably. I don't know. Maybe all the. I'm thinking. Maybe. I would say maybe no. Just go with Seagull and Mike. Those
Okay.
are good.
I think those are good picks. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions that I had for you. Thank you so much, Jay, for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time being here. It's been wonderful having you. I've learned a lot about you. It's been a ton of fun. I hope you had fun. If you didn't have fun, too bad. It's done. So for everyone out there, this has been Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name has been Blake Panashevitz, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And we're all good.